In a world ruled by greed and avarice, where money becomes more important than blood ties, a painful tale begins, one that shakes hearts to their core. A girl wronged by those closest to her, robbed of her rights and cast out of her father's home as if she were a stranger without mercy or pity. How can siblings turn into enemies? How can the oppressed be deprived of their rights while the oppressor revels in wealth? This is the story of Mariam, the girl who faced the cruelty of her brothers after the death of her father, the just merchant, and found herself alone on the streets. She owned nothing but her faith in divine justice. But would she remain oppressed forever? Or did fate hold surprises she could never have anticipated? Long ago, in a distant village surrounded by mountains and valleys, lived a man named Abdul Rahman. He was a well-known merchant in the city's marketplace, trading grains with a vast fortune. But unlike other merchants, he was a just, compassionate and kind-hearted man who helped the poor and wished good for all. Abdul Rahman had 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter. His daughter, Mariam, was the closest to his heart, the only one who did not covet his wealth, unlike her brothers, who eagerly awaited his death to seize his fortune. Mariam was a pure-hearted girl, raised in her father's home on love and mercy. She thought only of serving and caring for him. She was the only one who stayed by his side when he fell ill, rejoiced in his happiness, and grieved in his sorrow. She knew her 4 brothers did not share her kindness. They cared only for money and their own interests. Many suitors sought her hand, but she refused marriage, telling her father, "Father, I don't need a man to own me. I wish to stay by your side, care for you, and tend to you. That is my duty." Abdul Rahman was overjoyed by her words, comforted in knowing that her brothers would never treat her as her gentle heart deserved. He feared for her after his death. Days passed, and Abdul Rahman grew old until the day came when he fell gravely ill. Mariam stayed by his side day and night, wiping his brow and praying for his recovery. But illness showed no mercy to his frail body, and after days of suffering, he passed away, holding his daughter's hand with tears in his eyes, as if he knew her days of torment had just begun. At that moment, Mariam was alone in the house. Her brothers arrived only after learning of their father's death. They entered the house thinking of only one thing, the inheritance. They did not grieve as Mariam did, nor did they weep as she wept. Instead, they sat in their father's room and began discussing how to divide his wealth as if nothing had happened. Days after their father's death, the 4 brothers gathered in the family's grand house, sitting around a table with papers and ledgers, counting money and dividing lands and properties among themselves. The eldest, Salim, was the greediest, declaring sharply, "We must divide the inheritance quickly. No need for delay." The second brother, Rashid, smirked cunningly and said, "We'll take everything. Mariam is just a girl. She has no right to the inheritance." Mariam looked at them in shock and said in a trembling voice, "But my brothers, I was with our father all his life. I served him and stayed awake for his comfort. How can you deprive me of my right?" The third brother, Mubarak, laughed mockingly and said, "Don't be foolish, Mariam. We are the men, and the wealth is ours. You're just a girl. Live as women do. These matters don't concern you." Mariam pleaded with them, reminding them of God, telling them that depriving her of her rights was a grave injustice. But their hearts held no mercy. After dividing the wealth, each took his share, and the grand house went to Mubarak, the cruelest of them all, a man who knew no compassion. One day, Mariam returned home to collect some of her belongings, only to find Mubarak blocking the door. Coldly, he said, "You no longer belong here. This house is mine now. Leave at once." Mariam looked at him with tearful eyes and said, "Where will I go? This is my father's house." But he did not listen. Instead, he grabbed her arm, shoved her out forcefully, and slammed the door in her face, leaving her in the darkness, homeless, familyless, and without support. Mariam wandered the streets, not knowing where to go. Her entire life had been in that house, sustained by her father's care. She walked in fear and betrayal, remembering how her brothers once held her hand when they were afraid as children. Now, she stood alone and powerless, with no one to ask about her. The sky began to rain, and she took shelter under an old wall, weeping and praying to God to restore her rights and take them back from those who had wronged her. She did not know that destiny held unforeseen surprises for her, that the coming days would bring even greater injustice, but also divine justice. She sat shivering in the cold rain, feeling as though the whole world had abandoned her. She could not believe that her brothers, who once shared food and play with her, had turned into heartless beasts, casting her out of her father's house as if she were a stranger without mercy or compassion. She raised her eyes to the heavens, her tears mixing with the raindrops, and whispered with a trembling voice, "O God, you know I have wronged no one, and you know they took my rights by force. Do not abandon me, my Lord." But the heavens did not answer, and the rain kept falling, as if weeping with her. Mariam walked through the streets searching for shelter, but no one helped her. In her village, people feared interfering in others' affairs, and no one dared stand against her brothers, who had become the wealthy and powerful after their father's death. Finally, she reached an old house on the village outskirts, where an elderly woman named Khadijah lived, known for her wisdom and kindness. Mariam knocked timidly, and when the old woman opened the door, she looked at her with sadness and said, "Come in, my child. I know what happened to you. News travels fast in this village." Mariam entered and sat by the fireplace, feeling warmth for the first time in days. She looked at the old woman and said in a broken voice, "Aunt Khadijah, am I wrong? Should I have stayed silent and let them take my rights?" Khadijah smiled sadly, placed a hand on her head, and said, "No, my dear. The truth is the truth. But sometimes the oppressor is stronger than the oppressed in this world. Yet do you know, no one is stronger than the justice of heaven." Though Mariam now lived in Khadijah's home, her brothers had not forgotten her. They feared she might speak out and expose their true nature to the villagers, so they began sending threats through hired thugs. One night, a burly man who worked for her brother Mubarak knocked on the door. When Khadijah opened it, he said harshly, "Tell that girl to disappear, or her fate will be worse than she imagines." But Mariam was no longer afraid. She looked at him with steady eyes and said, "I ask them for nothing but my right. If they think threats will frighten me, they are mistaken." The man slammed the door angrily and left, muttering curses. Days later, Mariam awoke to find Khadijah's house burned to the ground overnight. The flames had devoured everything, leaving only ashes. Khadijah stood by the ruins, weeping silently. She had lost everything for sheltering Mariam. Mariam stared at the wreckage and said, "My brothers did this. They won't stop until they erase me from existence." Khadijah took her hand and said, "Do not grieve, my child. They may burn houses, but they cannot burn the truth. God sees and hears all. But where will you go now?" There was no place left for her in the village. She had become an enemy to those who held power and wealth. Mariam stood at the village's edge, gazing at it one last time. Here, she was born. Here she had lived. Here her father was buried. But now, it was no longer her home. She turned to Khadijah and said, "I will leave, but I will not forget. One day I will return, and my brothers will learn that God never forgets the rights of the oppressed." Khadijah squeezed her hands, gave her a little money, and said, "Go, my child, but never forget that your kind heart is the greatest treasure you possess. Do not let injustice turn it to stone." And with the sunrise, Mariam walked down the road, not knowing where she was headed, but knowing one thing for certain. One day, justice would return to its rightful place. Mariam traveled to a distant city, one where her father had secretly traded without her brother's knowledge. She alone knew this secret, for her father had told her before his death to seek a merchant named Jabir, who held a trust for her. When she reached the city, She went to the marketplace and asked about him. She was directed to his shop. She knocked hesitantly, and when she entered and introduced herself, Jabir welcomed her warmly, his eyes shining with sympathy. "Welcome, daughter of my dear friend Abdul Rahman," he said in a fatherly tone. "I have been expecting you since I heard of his passing. He always spoke of you, assuring me you were the only one who deserved his trust." Mariam sat before him and told her whole story: her father's death, her brother's injustice, the day they cast her out without mercy. Jabir listened intently, his eyes growing sadder with each word. When she finished, he stood, took a small key from an old wooden box and said, "This is for you, Mariam. Your father left a precious trust here. Follow me." He led her to a large storeroom behind the shop, opened the heavy door, and revealed sacks of wheat and spices. In a corner stood an ornate iron chest. He inserted the key, and the chest opened, revealing documents and small leather pouches. "All this is yours," Jabir said, gesturing inside. "This shop, the warehouse, and these lands on the city's outskirts